I'd like to make a correction from some points made earlier by the representative from the 14th, asserting that she knew the motivation behind this bill without coming to talk to me. I'd like to quote, if you wouldn't mind, from a few printed documents.
Without objection.
First, I'd like to reference a November 2022 article in The Guardian, not exactly your most conservative publication. The author writes, the article is entitled, "An Explosion, What is Behind the Rise in Girls Questioning Their Gender Identity?" And it quotes, according to a study commissioned by NHS England 10 years ago, there were just under 250 referrals to this clinic that does gender transition services. Last year, there were more than 5,000, which was twice the number in the previous year. We're seeing an explosion. The article further states, quote, "Like all NHS employees interviewed, this particular psychologist asked for anonymity due to the sensitivity of the subject. The psychologist says, quote, I might have seen one child with gender dysphoria once every 2 years when I started practicing. It was very niche and rare. Now, somewhere between 10 and 20% of her caseload is made up of adolescents registered as female at birth who identify as non-binary or trans, with just an occasional male registered teenager who identifies as trans." And then one other part in the article, it says, many are aware of online content that has educated their children about gender. And the influence of YouTubers, Tumblr accounts, and TikTok personalities where individuals' medical transitions are documented in detail, footage of recoveries from double mastectomies, phalloplasty, or bottom surgery have been watched by hundreds of thousands. We live, as we know, in interesting times when everything's available at our fingertips in these devices we carry around in our pockets, and our teenagers are carrying them around as well. And so we have this perfect storm, if you will, that's brewing, because it combines the trouble of adolescence, the confusion of adolescence, with this availability, this vast availability of information that can help affirm our suspicions, that can help affirm our notions, that can help affirm our feelings at any one given point in time. I'd like to further quote, Mr. Speaker, from Psychology Today. This is a September 2022 article on social contagion, how others secretly control your behavior. The key points of the article. Number one, social contagion is the spread of emotions or behaviors from one individual to another, sometimes without awareness. Number two, social contagion processes become problematic when they lead to spates of aggressive or self-injurious behaviors. And number three, an example of social contagion is the 1962 June bug, when workers developed all the same psychologically induced symptoms. The article continues, in June 1962, dozens of workers in a textile factory came down with the same physical symptoms, rashes, numbness in the hands and feet, and episodes of nausea. It was initially believed that the factory had been infested with some sort of toxic insect that had bitten the workers. This became known as the June bug epidemic. What happened? It was determined that this was a form of mass hysteria or social contagion. Some workers developed these psychologically induced symptoms, and others developed the same complaints as the disease, quote unquote, spread from worker to worker. Social contagion is the subtle and sometimes unwitting spread of emotions or behaviors from one individual to others. Emotional contagion is the spread of emotions through crowds and is the reason why a movie seems funnier if we are in a crowded theater as opposed to watching it alone. Our mood is influenced by those laughing around us. The same process would cause a stampede wave of fear if someone were to suddenly yell fire in a crowded theater. You might recall we had a little bit of social contagion back in 2019, 2020. A study by Friedman and Riggio, 1981, found that emotionally expressive individuals, let me repeat that, emotionally expressive individuals, persons who displayed high instances of nonverbal cues of emotion, primarily facial expressions, were able to infect the emotions, moods of others in the room without any verbal interaction. Subsequent research found that certain individuals are more prone to emotional contagion processes. Why are we talking about this? Because we are experiencing social contagion as it relates to this dysphoria. I'd like to thank all who participated in this discussion today. I really appreciate the time and energy that everyone has put in, including my opponents. I had a number of personal stories that I wanted to share. For sake of time, I'm going to skip past those personal stories and sort of get to some of the meat and potatoes, I guess. The reality is that some people would call me cisgender and suggest that because I'm cisgender that I cannot relate or understand. So I'd like to take some time to focus on specific stories to remind us that these are individuals that are with real stories that have been harmed by the rush to decision making. Before I do so, though, I'd like to make sure it's clear. I want to make sure it's clear to every Wisconsinite, Mr. Speaker, of every age, that you are important. Every parent, every child, you are valid, you have worth. We can affirm you in your existence and lovingly encourage you to grow and mature and to trust that everything's going to be fine. We don't want to discredit any individual. We know that parents struggle with situations like this. We know that it's hard. In my family, I struggled when my daughter was going through anxiety and depression. And I know the prospect of suicide is very scary. And I know it's hard. And I know that there are no clear answers. So in no way are we diminishing the struggles that individuals or families are going through. As has been well documented today, there are serious, significant, long-term health consequences to some of the decisions that are being made. We have a responsibility to recognize the potential dangers and adopt policies that will protect our population from this social contagion. So a couple of stories. In fact, I'll skip one for sake of time. The first is from Billy Burley, who submitted written testimony to the committee. Billy says, I used to be transgender. I followed the advice of therapists and leading research, and they were wrong. I now have irreversible damage to my body and have wasted well over $100,000. This is my story. In the first grade, the thought, quote, God made a mistake, I'm a girl, came into my mind. That thought was intrusive and consistent and persisted throughout my childhood, adolescence, and well into adulthood. If I could have, I would have quickly chosen any path that would have transformed me into a girl. When I was about 21, I had a breakdown and sought help for the disconnect between my mind telling me I was a woman and my body telling me I was a man. I went to a therapist that dealt with such issues and was hoping for a quick fix and recovery. After spending about 5 years in therapy, in the effort to resolve my mind-body disconnect, I decided to follow the encouragement from my therapist and from all the journal articles and books I read. My research indicated that I potentially had a birth defect. My brain may have been washed with the wrong hormone while in gestation. And the recommended path forward for me to lead a happy and productive life was to change my body to match my mind. After spending about 5 years in therapy, I told my therapist I wanted to transition. She told me that she knew I was going to make that decision. She gave me a letter to take to a specific doctor, and I started a male hormone suppressant and on estrogen. In my first surgery, I had a penile inversion, an Adam's apple shave, and a brow shave. After the surgery, the surgeon had difficulty stopping the bleeding from my new internal female genitalia. The new internal cavity was packed with gauze, and a sandbag was placed on my lower abdomen, but the bleeding did not stop. I received a blood transfusion and plasma, and eventually the bleeding stopped. But modifying my genitalia required 2 surgeries. So for about 4 months later, I was back for part 2 labioplasty. I was literally desperate for the happiness I believed was ensured me. I was in my early 30s when I had this bottom surgery, as well as several other body and voice feminizing surgeries. After presenting as a woman for about 7 years, I fell into a pit of despair. I had more problems at that point than before I transitioned. The encouragement I received from therapists, books, and journal articles was wrong. Suicidal thoughts were now consistently in my mind. In this pit of despair, I called out to Jesus. I gave my life and all of my problems to him. And at that point, he set me on a road of recovery that no therapist or medical professional was able to do. Later in life, I heard it said that everyone has a need to be accepted, significant, and secure. I agree with this, and I started thinking about how I had tried to satisfy these needs in my younger years. I had many problems as a child. I was very skinny, had a speech impediment, had learning difficulties, was picked on, was sexually abused, and I didn't seem to fit in with the other boys. I did, however, seem to fit in with the girls. As a boy, I didn't feel accepted, significant, or secure. But if I were a girl, I believed I would have felt accepted and secure, and possibly more significant.
Representative from the 97th, 2 minutes left on debate.
In hindsight, I see I had several underlying problems that reinforced the false thought that I was a girl. The therapist never did uncover nor help me with these underlying issues. The therapists and researchers with respect to me got it completely wrong. They profited while it cost me over $100,000. Permanent modification and scarring in my body, loss of ability to have sex, and the loss of my gallbladder possibly due to estrogen therapy. In closing, I received gender-affirming mental health care instead of mental health care. I had many childhood issues that contributed to my gender dysphoria. How many children are being encouraged to be confused about their gender? How many children are receiving gender-affirming mental health care instead of mental health care? It is important to remember that this bill is speaking of minors only, and it addresses minors only because of the science of brain development. I think it's helpful to quote the gentle lady from the 57th from January 20, 2022, in this chamber, who said, and I quote, "So here's some brain development 101. The rational part of a teenage brain or a young person's brain is not fully developed and will not be until age 25. This is medical fact. In the teenage brain, the connections between the emotional part and the decision-making center are still developing, and they are not always developing at the same rate. This explains why teens have overwhelming emotional input in the decisions they make, and they can often not explain later what they were thinking. I have asked that exact question of the teenagers in my house. What were you thinking? And now I know that they literally don't know what they were thinking because they were acting with a different part of their brain." End quote. I believe that the gentle lady from the 57th is correct in her understanding of brain development. And that is why the Help Not Harm bill gives minors the time they need to develop mentally in order to fully comprehend the long-term choice they could make.